Hi, I'm Sam. About 5 years ago, my whole world was turned upside down. More on that later, but let's just say, in what was supposed to be the happiest time in my life, I felt totally lost. You're listening to or watching my show, where we'll be talking with friends in healthcare, wellness, and holistic healing about real self care. I'm not talking about pedicures and bubble baths. We're talking true acts of care to maintain our physical and mental health so we can truly live fearlessly and fulfilled. Say it with me, self-care is my job. Hey, it's me, Sam. How are ya? So here I am. I'm about to kick off my first episode of Self-Care is My Job. So just a quick moment about what does that mean, right? Like, why am I saying this phrase repetitively? Self-care is my job. Truth be told, a couple of weeks ago, this sort of affirmation or mantra or phrase just sort of came into my mind. I woke up with it, and at first it didn't mean much to me, but it kept rambling around in my head. And finally, I realized that whether it's, my intuition or whether it was just an idea, whatever it is, this is a message that I need to pay attention to because it has multiple meanings. Self-care is my job. Self-care is my job. So this is a perfect segue for me to really introduce myself, right? Here I am, Samantha Long. Nice to meet you. I'm a yoga instructor and a self-care mentor for moms. So I have two small kids. I live in northern New Jersey. A little bit of background there. And self-care is extremely important to me as a mother and as a woman and as a human being. Self-care is my job is a perfect phrase for me to incorporate into this content that I want to share with you guys. Because not only is it a message that describes what I do and why I'm putting this together, right? Because self-care is my job. That's my whole purpose, is to help people prioritize their self-care so that they can rekindle their self-worth, their self-love, their self-compassion, their self-trust, so that they can sort of bravely and unapologetically and smoothly move through their life without fear of judgment, without lack of confidence, and just all around feeling whole, healthy, and happy. So the purpose, my entire purpose that I've sort of realized over time that I need to share this message with as many people as possible, really that's the perfect explanation, right? Self-care is my job. So then you have self-care is my job, just sort of switching the emphasis a little bit, right? Self-care is my job. So this became an ongoing loop in my head for that reason also. It was almost the perfect affirmation or repetitive mantra for me to keep in my mind so that I remember that every single day it is my job to incorporate whatever forms of self-care that I need for, specifically for not only the type of person that I am, but what is going on in my life? What is my body and my mind experiencing, given what's going on externally around me or what's going on solely just inside? So obviously you can take that all back to the fact that I'm a yoga teacher. A little bit about yoga, right? So I have been practicing yoga for probably close to 13 years, and I am a relatively new yoga instructor. I'm a Yoga Alliance certified, registered 200-hour yoga instructor. And I've been teaching for probably actively teaching after going through my training for probably only about a year and a half. But like I said, been practicing for quite some time. And when I first had my children, which is a larger story that I'm going to get into of what kind of led me to this place right now. When I first had my kids, I had to really put emphasis back on placing importance on my yoga practice. Not just a home practice of me, making sure that I get on my mat every other day at minimum, but, getting into the studio and really utilizing what yoga means in order to reconnect with my true self. So what do I mean by that? Let's talk just for a second about what yoga is and why does it relate to self-care and the purpose of self-care. So yoga, the actual meaning of yoga, if translated from Sanskrit, is to yoke. Yoke meaning to unite. So I don't know if you've ever heard that term, yoke, but it's a lesser known and lesser used verb, which means just to unite, to connect, right? And not only, a lot of people kind of go to the idea of connecting with each other, and there is definitely something to be said about that. But the true meaning of yoga in that respect is to unite mind, body, and soul. So not to go too deep into it right now, but think about how pleasant and light and organized and sort of peaceful it might feel to come to a place in your life where your mind, your body, and your soul are totally organized. Think about becoming, almost like becoming super organized in your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions are very aligned with each other. You know exactly who you are. You know how to listen to your body. Your mind listens to your body listens to your mind, and they can act accordingly with each other. And as far as the soul angle of it, you know, the essence of, the true essence of who you really are becomes then reflected in your feelings, your thoughts, and your emotions as you go through about your daily life. And everything yokes with each other and actually starts to make sense to you. So when you think about that yoga as in that being the goal of yoga, right? I actually don't even like to use the word goal a lot of the time, because the word goals tends to set off some people's perfectionism, which I am 100% guilty of having that. Meaning the idea of having a goal means we're trying to not only create something or incorporate something into your life or achieve something, but we're potentially trying to perfect something, to master something. So you've also probably heard the phrase to practice yoga. There is a reason that we repetitively in the yoga world and all the yogis, there's a reason that we always phrase it that way. And that's because exactly that. Yoga is a practice. And it is a practice whether you are somebody who is entering a yoga studio for the very first time in your life, or coming into your very first down dog or child's pose. And it is also a practice for the person that has been practicing yoga, that has an active yoga practice for 13 years. It's a practice for somebody who has an active yoga practice for 50 years. It's still a practice. And you know what's beautiful about that? And this is something I always say, you can incorporate that idea not only into your yoga practice, but into your life. Think of life as a yoga practice. Life is also a practice, right? We try something, we may succeed, we might fail, we might fall somewhere in between, but either way, we learn from the experience and we refine going forward. So say, for example, I come into a yoga pose, I come into my warrior two. And I come into the basis of the shape, the basis of the pose, right? And then I can refine from there based on how it feels for my body. And I'm digressing a little bit right now because we can talk a lot more about, you know, alignment and how this relates to life, right? But based on how it feels for your body, whether you feel stable, whether you feel shaky, you can refine your pose physically. You can adjust your breath, and we can make all of these mini changes until we come to a place of lightness. We come to a place of ease, right? And you can take this right into your life. We are not trying to perfect anything. This is why I love yoga so much and why I very, very closely align the two. Obviously, when we talk about the physical practice of yoga, you know, going to class and either getting in your slow flow or your power flow or your hatha yoga or your, or maybe it's just a breathing and meditation class, whatever it is, showing up to the studio or showing up on your mat in your own home is really just the physical practice. As many people know, there's an entire other philosophical side of yoga. There's a spiritual practice of yoga. And, but absolutely, when it comes to the physical practice of yoga, that completely falls into the category of physical self-care, right? But then there are also parts of yoga as a practice as a whole that could fall into your mental self-care, your spiritual self-care, your emotional self-care. So that's why I love to talk about these two things in conjunction with each other and work with people to help them prioritize not only a physical yoga practice, although I am a teacher and I do private sessions and, you know, weekly studio classes, but I also really like to take not only the physical, but the spiritual and philosophical approach to yoga and incorporate it into a much larger self-care practice. So let's talk about self-care for a second. Why self-care, right? Why self-care, Sam? So is it because it's just the thing right now? Like, it's the thing, right? I've been talking about this a lot lately in some of my Facebook Lives and other content. So self-care is like such a buzz phrase right now, right? I keep saying like self-care is the new gratitude, right? So for the longest time, it was all about the gratitude, right? Not that I'm knocking, you know, having a gratitude practice, which would be, you know, maybe writing down 3 things in the evening or in the morning that you're grateful for so that you can focus on positive things in your life and then make focusing on the positive, therefore, a habit as opposed to the habit of focusing on the negative. It's a beautiful practice, the gratitude, right? But it definitely became like a thing, right? Like this buzz phrase or this fad, right? And the reason for that is because we live in a world, and, you know, for better or for worse, we live in a world where our culture and the media and marketing are all kind of jumbled together. And what happens is whatever the focus is in culture gets shifted so that something can be either marketed or sold to you more easily. So when we talk about self-care now, flash back into, you know, this realm, you probably hear that phrase everywhere, right? You hear it everywhere. Self-care, take care of yourself, putting yourself first. Don't forget, you know, these self-care, you know, here's a list of 7, you know, things you can do for yourself, self-care related things in the morning or whatever the article is, right? And some of these, you know, some of this stuff is great, but some of it, in all honesty, is especially for women, some of it is just about selling you like a skincare line, or encouraging you to book a massage, or selling you some oils, or selling you, you know, some lotion, or talking, of course, about taking bubble baths and going to get your hair did and getting your pedicure, okay? Especially as far as what the media is going to tell us women that we really need in our life as far as self-care. So I'm here to say that, you know, my focus when coming from that side and talking about self-care as a whole is not on that, those frivolous, whether it's a service or an offering or a product, what I've been calling, you know, the frivolous self-care or even the luxury self-care. So some of it, you know, the word frivolous has a little bit of a negative connotation, and maybe for good reason, right? But what I mean by that is that's like sort of the luxurious or like the level 3 or 4 or 5 self-care that you can incorporate into your life. When I talk about self-care, I am talking about, as I mentioned before, physical self-care, as far as something, you know, categories that are way more basic and will cut more to the root of what you really, really need in your life to feel happy, safe, and whole and healthy, as opposed to something that is potentially a Band-Aid or a quick self-medication to make you feel happy or healthy or stable at the moment. You know, even within that, you might have even seen having a drink or a glass of wine, especially, again, for the women, having a glass of wine portrayed as a category of self-care or a form of self-care. It depends. Are you celebrating? Maybe it is, if it's a celebratory cocktail or something where you're, connecting at the same time. You're not drinking alone. You're drinking with a group of people. You're having a good time. You're incorporating fun into your life. You're connecting and you're keeping your vibe high. Yeah, totally that falls into self-care. But if we're drinking to self-medicate, it's not. It's just not. So I'm talking about much more basic approaches to self-care. Physical, right? So you can incorporate into those groups or incorporate into the physical self-care, whether it's a physical practice of yoga, right? Or whether it's any form of exercise that you love, something that you're really into. Some of us haven't even found our thing yet. I can talk to you for hours about how I literally never even had a physical self-care practice until I really started focusing on yoga. And then subsequently in recent years, only in recent years, have I really come to a place where I can say that depending on what it is, I enjoy working out. I was never that person, right? But it's more about deciding what you as a person need most in when it comes to your forms of self-care. So you have your exercise and your physical self-care. You have your exercise. You have your lifestyle stuff. So do you move around a lot? Do you incorporate a lot of movement and activity into your day? Or are you mostly sedentary throughout your day? Things like that when it comes to lifestyle. Also diet, not a diet. Again, a perfect example of the way that culture and the media can kind of portray self-care as one thing, but it's actually another, is by selling you a diet, whether it's keto or whether it's, oh please, I'm not even up to speed on some of these things, but whether it's keto, whether it's Atkins, whether it's, paleo or whatever it is. Hey girl, girl, guy, whoever you are, if it works for you, great. But question being, is that the form of self-care that you actually need right here, right now in this period of your life, according to the type of person that you are? Is it working? If it's working, great. If not, then maybe there's another form of self-care to focus on. So you've got that physical. You've also got your mental self-care. Whether that includes proper communication with people in your circle, in your family, your partner, relationships, things like that. Self-awareness. Things surrounding whether or not you are living your life in accordance with who you really truly are, which is such a much larger conversation, right? So your mental, just your general mental health. For me, as an example, a lot of my mental health can be managed with communicating and, really openly, authentically communicating with the people around me. And also a ton of journaling. I'm massive on journaling. So things like that can actually help your mental health. And obviously incorporating into that, whether it is talk therapy, coaching, proper medication sometimes. Many of us, we are specifically right now going through a massive crazy time in the world between a pandemic and political stuff and everything, external things that are affecting how we feel inside. And sometimes when things get to a certain level, that really does mean you can put together your physical and your mental self-care as far as, are you putting your health care in general as a priority? And do you need medication to keep you in a space that's safe for you? Right? From whether it's physically or mentally. Combining the two together. You have emotional self-care. You have social self-care. Okay? You have self-care related to your relationships in your life. So we can go down and down the line. And then at the very end of that line, maybe at that point we come to the frivolous and the luxury self-care of enjoying a facial mask and a bubble bath and getting your pedicure and your hair did and your nails did, okay? Because here's the thing. All of those things that are being marketed to you may make you feel like a new woman, or may energize you or rejuvenate you in some way for a period of time. But it really doesn't mean much if you're not asking yourself, what is the intention behind me going for that offering or that service? Therefore, the meaning of that being, what do you really, really need in your life right now? Do you need to go get your hair did or your nails did? Do you need a bubble bath? Do you need a massage? Or is that a stress buster, a momentary, temporary stress buster for you, right? For something that is underlying a chronic or continuous issue that you're not actually addressing, okay? So all of that really, really does come back to self-awareness, right? What is your intention behind what you feel you need? When you ask these, these why questions, right? Why do I feel I need this? Or what do I need, right? It really does come back to self-awareness. And when we can become super self-aware, it all comes back to what I was saying about yoga in the beginning of this conversation. When we can ask ourselves the proper questions, become really, really aligned with our true self, what we really, really want and need and desire in life in order to feel healthy, happy, and whole. We become really self-aware. And once we become really self-aware, a lot of barriers or boundaries or obstacles that are continuously in our way of achieving our goals or making proper changes or either necessary or wanted changes in our lives, they start to break down. Because when we get super self-aware, we can sort of unapologetically go through life and make decisions that are aligned with what we really, really want, and ask the proper questions that might come into play in doing so, right? And all of a sudden, emerges from beneath is what? Self-love, self-worth, self-trust, where we can really, really live organized. I always like to come back to that. Organized as far as mind, body, and soul, totally aligned. And, to take it a step further, we can make shit happen. We can get shit done. And that's the coach in me, right? Coming out and saying, hey, if you want more, you can make that happen. But you need to become really, really aligned and self-aware as far as what you really, really do want. So that's my answer to why self-care. One side of my answer to why self-care, Sam, for me personally and for you. Why am I feeling this desire to share this message with you? That's part of why. And the other part of why is based on my story of what has unfolded for me over the past 5 years. And I know that a lot of my story is going to come out more and more through the conversations that this show is going to include and consist of. Conversations with people in healthcare, in the wellness industry, in intuitive healing, and in fitness, in lifestyle, all of these areas that we can focus on as far as ways that we can feel happy, whole, and safe and healthy. Did I say that? But also, talking about the real deal shit, the stuff that gets in our way. Like, we have to address not only the solution to how do I enact big changes in my life, right? What would be the solution to having me feel more whole, safe, stable, healthy, and happy as a person? And in addition to that, enact these changes that I'd like to enact in my life. Great. Let's talk about the solutions, right? Let's talk about the answers of how we get there. But let's also be real and talk about the things that get in our way. So I really do feel like it's going to be great to have these conversations with wellness professionals and entrepreneurs and individuals about these things. But I also think that in all of that, talking about our obstacles, a lot will come out, and not only about my story and what my sort of journey has been, but other people's as well. It's very important, I feel, to have sort of this personal story attached, so that somebody out there can see authentically that something is going on with a person and then maybe connect even more and therefore be inspired to make some changes in their own life, right? So here's a bit, given that, right? Here's a bit about my story, which we'll go deeper into in the next 5 minutes. I'm going to try to get as much of it as possible. So we're going to rewind about 5 years. So for reference, my daughter, my first child, my daughter is about 5.5. And so if we go back, I guess technically if we go back, 6 years to before she was born. Say for example, when I was 4 months pregnant with her, because that was when I had to tell my job that I was pregnant. I was showing. And for reference, I have my background, and before I had my children, I was in the publishing industry for over 10 years. And I had a really successful career in publishing. I was, for majority of my career, I was in sales and marketing. And towards the end of that time in my life, I had actually, what I thought at least, I had actually nailed what I felt was my dream job. I had moved from the sales side into more of a publisher role, and I was at a really big publishing media company in Rockefeller Center in the city, which is where I worked the majority of that career. And I had only been at that new position for a relatively short amount of time before I got pregnant with my first kid. And I had been married about 2 years, so it should have been really of no shock that I was ready to, build a family. But 4 months into my pregnancy, when I had to tell them that I was pregnant, and I did so, told my boss, my superior, who had previous to that been like so supportive of having me in the group and on the team at the company. We had known each other before I started the position. It was like a really good relationship. And when I told her I was pregnant, the entire tune changed. The entire, the feeling in the room almost, even in that moment, shifted. I mean, it was so apparent that she was not prepared for me to drop that bomb. And then over the next few months, it became more and more apparent to me that there was going to be a consequence. There was going to be a day when the shit hit the fan on this whole new, adventure in my life. And sure enough, when I was about 8 months pregnant, there was a round of layoffs at the company, and I was brought into a room to be told that I was being let go. Big old belly, just waddling right into that room. And at the same time, I was in the process of training somebody who was new to my team on all of my projects so that they could cover me when I went on maternity leave. So it was kind of crazy, because at the same time of me being let go because of a round of layoffs or a restructuring, actually they had already hired somebody who was to take over for me. So it was quite apparent that I wasn't being let go because of a round of layoffs and a restructuring. I was being let go because I was pregnant and because potentially my priorities would shift after having a kid. And then there was the maternity leave that they would have to incorporate in the time that I would be away because of that. And whatever else fell into the, idea of me going from what I was to becoming a working mom. All of those things I would never experience, because that was basically the end of my publishing career. Now, at the time I wasn't I wasn't 100% decided on that. Obviously, in my head, it was, okay, even at the moment, I had gone on 3 interviews, actually, even in that stage of me being really pregnant. So even right after being laid off, I had gone on 2 or 3 interviews. But it was like, how do you get a job when you are literally weeks away from having to take maternity leave? I mean, whether that would be 6 weeks, whether it would be 8 weeks, whether it would be 11 weeks, which is ultimately what I would have had at this company. Whatever it looked like, I would have had to be hired by a company who would be willing to literally let me start for maybe like a few days and then go on maternity leave. That wasn't really going to happen. You can't really expect somebody to hire you in that space. Then, flash forward a few weeks, I have Aria, my daughter, everything goes relatively smoothly, except for the fact that now I have the added anxiety of job searching while I'm in the midst of adjusting to becoming a new mother for the very first time. That hit me like a ton of bricks. There was a ton of anxiety that was triggered by this sort of crazy moment in my life that was completely unexpected. And when I say unexpected, I have to emphasize that, because I kid you not, there was never a moment in, planning to become pregnant and have a family, even in the during the whole course of the pregnancy when I was still working. There was never really a thought in my mind of becoming a stay-at-home mom. And believe me, there are going to be conversations in this show about the struggles of being a stay-at-home mom, because it is the hardest friggin' job in the world, which is a much larger conversation. But in my head, I was, taking my 10 or 11 weeks of maternity leave, that my daughter would be then going to daycare while I go back to work and while my husband worked as well. And she would, she was already signed up for a daycare program. She was gonna be there from 12 weeks. She would be there, which so many families and mothers decide to do or have to do. At 12 weeks, she was going to be in daycare for 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. It would be probably from 6:30 in the morning before I would get on the bus to 6:30 in the evening by the time I would come take the bus back to Jersey and pick her up, right? It's a long time for a 12-week-old baby to be in daycare. So what happened? Having been pushed out of that job, obviously I didn't rush back to the corporate world, because why am I rushing back to the corporate world when, the baby's so young and we're still adjusting to even, getting used to being a family and everything that comes with that. So in a nutshell, that was my that was probably one of the hardest times in my life, because not only was all this anxiety triggered by so many new things happening, but my identity was literally shifted overnight. I went from having my a massive part of my identity wrapped up in my corporate career, to just being mom. And not that being mom isn't definitely the most important job in the world, but I am here to tell you that just because that might very well be true doesn't mean that when your identity shifts like that and you have to figure out what that feels like and looks like for your new lifestyle, right? When life changes like that, it doesn't mean it's really that easy, even though from the outside it would seem that a mother's job is probably the most important job in the world. So how could it not, the question being, right, how could it not feel fulfilling where I suddenly wouldn't just, be on cloud nine, like, oh, well, not only am I a new mom and I'm enjoying the new baby and everything's so wonderful, but also I don't have to, I'm so lucky, right? Because I don't have to go back to work right away. I can't tell you how many people, probably most of the people at that time in my life where I told that I had been laid off while 8 months pregnant, believe it or not, most of the people said something along the lines to me, oh, well, doesn't that work out? Isn't that great, though, that it'll just work out? You'll be able to be with the baby. And most of the time, I'm sure the intention was good, trying to make me feel better, right? Which is great. But at the time, it was absolutely friggin' infuriating for me. Because in my head, and still to this day, I feel the same way. If I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, if I wanted to leave my career to be with my child all day long and become a stay-at-home mom, then I would have made that decision on my own. I would have and could have made that decision on my own to leave my career. So telling me that I was lucky to have this experience that was in fact actually traumatizing for me, because I had placed a massive emphasis and importance on my career up until that point, and it was a massive part of my identity that just was gone in the blink of an eye, because obviously during that time it wouldn't have been so easy for me to just jump right back into a new position. So probably one of the most difficult periods of my life, absolutely. And what happened? I lost myself. I had to go down a very bumpy, rocky road of trying to remember who I was and had always been outside of that career. And unknowingly, not right away, but after a lot of bitching and moaning and bitterness and anger and sadness and a period of time that was relatively dark, even, you know, in what was supposed to be the happiest time in my life, and there were definitely some really, really happy moments, but it was also a very hard period of time for me to adjust. And when I came out finally, I almost can remember how it would actually feel, how it actually felt to wake up one morning and not, you know, it was, believe me, it wasn't a light bulb like, Sam, here's the answer, you need self-care, bing. No, it wasn't a light bulb moment, but there was definitely a shift one day. And unknowingly, I started to incorporate self-care into my life. That wasn't a term that I ever even used at that period of time. So now we're talking about maybe 4.5 years ago, right? You know, so when my daughter was just a bit older, and I finally had gotten to a point where I was ready to incorporate things that I really loved into my life. So I wasn't saying I need self-care. I was saying I need myself. I need to come back to who I really am. I need to realign with my true essence and my true nature. And I need to start doing, by way of doing things and incorporating things into my life that I loved. So those things happened to be, for me, at that moment in time in my life, those things happened to be yoga. So there was I was already somebody who practiced yoga somewhat regularly, but I really had to amp it up and incorporate a ton more into my life. And it really saved me, which will be another episode of this, right? Why did yoga save me? It saved me physically, it saved me mentally, it saved me spiritually. I also incorporated music into my life. So the very short background there is that I had always been sort of this, you know, dabbling singer-songwriter. I've been writing songs since I was like 8 years old. And always loved to sing, but unfortunately was really never encouraged to sing, by anybody, by anybody except one very, very, very good friend of mine. And that friend was actually, at the time, the way that I started incorporating more singing and more music into my life. We started recording. We started recording some music together, and writing here and there, and that was a way for me to incorporate some creativity into my life. And we are going to be having some much larger conversations also about what it means to incorporate something creative, whether it's art or whether it's just a passion or a hobby or honing in on a skill, or a talent, right? What that means from the perspective of self-care and what it does to you as a person. Sort of the idea of honoring the person that you really are, some kind of hobby or passion that you're drawn to already, and the act of not only honoring that thing, that calling that you feel, but actually physically the act of doing it, and how that can actually reconnect you to your true essence and your true nature by incorporating that kind of creative self-care in your life. So music was that to me. And the last thing I'll mention, which I mentioned before, but one thing that I was passionate about was wine. And I actually was able to find a company that I ultimately started working with, where I conducted private in-home wine tastings with people. And that was a wonderful time in my life, a wonderful thing for me to incorporate at the time. Not only because it was something that I already loved, wine, right? But wine brings people together, and I am all about the hangout. Like, if you know me, if you don't know me, you can tell that I'm a relatively extroverted person. I'm very talkative, very outgoing, and I'm kind of an open book. And that all kind of comes into play. Like, I like to hang out. So another thing, not only was I able to meet a ton of new friends and have a ton of fun doing these wine tastings and tasting a ton of wine and learning about something that I really loved, but I was able to have that sort of building a high vibe in my life by connecting with people. And at the same time, slowly but surely, not right away, speaking of connection and incorporating, making sure you're incorporating your relationships and connection into your life and just having a ton of fun, your social self-care, right? I started doing that eventually. I started planning a hell of a lot more girls' night outs, right? Girls' night outs. Because I needed it. And we'll get into this, but, was there some questions that would arise as far as what I was supposed to be doing versus what I was doing? When I would go out to my wine tastings, would there be people in my life that would judge me instead of just staying home and doing the dishes and allowing my husband to take a break after he had a long day at work? Yeah, there were a lot of those conversations. Were there conversations I had to have with my partner, with my husband, when I wanted to add another layer later down the road, another layer of business and another layer of investment when I eventually went into yoga teacher training, which was another sort of endeavor that I began? Were there hard conversations that I needed to have there when you start to incorporate things into your life that maybe somebody else wasn't really prepared for, right? There were some hard conversations and some more self-awareness that needed to happen. So these are all things that we're going to talk about, right? Because those are some of the barriers that sort of creeped up for me and that I had to work through and that I'm still constantly working through. And so that's the last thing I'll say, is that I'm on this journey with you. That's why I like to call myself, and not that this show and not that this message and the purpose of this entire self-care is my job content, not that it is only directed at moms, but it's just that that's my personal story and that's the audience that I directly work with from a coaching perspective. But I, at the same time, like to call myself a self-care mentor for moms. And the reason that I like the phrase mentor, the word mentor, as opposed to a coach, is because I'm still a relatively young, I don't want to say young mom because age comes into play there. I'm a mother of young children. I'm in my earlier years. I'm still in my earlier years of motherhood, which means that I am still learning every single day about incorporating self-care as a mom, which gets really, really complicated. And I'm still up against all the obstacles and barriers that get in the way of that, and I'm still consciously working through them and in the practice of that. And most of this, what we can really say is that we're always going to be in the practice of that, because things are going to come up in our lives and we're going to have to figure out all over again how to move past that, right? So I'm on this journey with you, and that's why I'm so excited that you're also on this journey with me and going into all of these conversations, these awesome conversations we're going to have with people, because we're going to learn together. And that's sort of that's one of many purposes of this show, is of course to be in the act of always being a student of life and always learning as we go and growing as we go. So will there be music? Yes. Will there be yoga? Yes. Will there be wine? Yes. Will there be meditation? Yes. Will there be breath? Yes. Will there be tons of energy? Yes. So please stick with me. The very first interview episode is going to be released within the next week. Next week, I'm actually going to be talking with a good friend of mine, Lisa Drew. She's my very first partnership on this show, and she's a psychotherapist and a mindset coach. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things. I'm going to try to, keep it current, where we can actually talk a little bit about how everybody's been dealing with this pandemic situation with COVID and with coping with all of these things that are going on in our current landscape. But also I want to talk to her about authentic living. Like, how do you incorporate certain aspects, how do you take on a certain mindset so that you can live fully and authentically as yourself without fear of judgment, without fear of failure? I think that so many of us come up against that. It's a lot of why perfectionism and why we feel like we have to be so perfect, and like even our actions need to be perfect. So I think that so many people, sort of hold themselves back from making changes in their lives because they're just fearful of making a mistake or being judged. And I really want to see if we can get into a conversation about that. So just a little heads up. But then again, a lot of these conversations are just going to flow. They're just going to come, they're going to ebb and flow, and we're going to be super, I'm, as a person, I'm an open book, so I can't wait to not only let you in a little bit more on my story, but just sort of take you on this journey with me of learning and growing. So again, oh my God, I'm so excited for you being here with me, and I just want to thank you in advance. I appreciate you. So the last thing I'll say is, say it with me: self-care is my job. Say it with me. Self-care is my job. So we can take it both ways, right? Self-care is my job. Self-care is my job. Nobody else is going to do it for you. And one last time, self-care is my job. Hey, thanks for listening or watching. Hopefully you will follow or subscribe. I hope to see you back here. And if you want to find me on Instagram, it's _aligned_heart or alignedheart.net.